Like many fans who discovered Pink Floyd after the 1970s, my first experience with the band came through the radio. In the years of admiration that followed, I watched Pink Floyd The Wall several times, reread Animal Farm to understand the references on the album Animals, and even attempted to synchronize my copy of The Dark Side of the Moon with The Wizard of Oz. However, it was not merely this middle period of Pink Floyd that captured my attention. I became especially intrigued by the tumultuous early years of the Pink Floyd sound. As Roger Keith Barrett, known as Syd, originally named the band in homage to the blues musicians Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, before they became simply Pink Floyd. Before the spotlights of the recording industry found them, they played in London clubs and became known as heralds of experimental psychedelic sounds and creators of extraordinary light shows. The year 1967 witnessed their rapid ascent to international recognition and, simultaneously, the destruction of Syd under the weight of fame and excessive use of LSD. In the wake of the Summer of Love, the Floyd lost its leader. Although this happened many months before, they formally replaced Barrett and released their second album with virtually no contribution from him. Barrett was the lyrical composer and the seductive voice of the band's early incarnation. He was the first to use echo machines and feedback in live performances, and insisted that their shows be as theatrical as they were musical. His music and his life were, and remain, symbols of profound influence for countless artists. He wrote nearly all of Pink Floyd's songs during his brief reign, including the first two singles, Arnold Lane and See Emily Play, with the exception of only one track on their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and a third single, Apples and Oranges, released before the second record, A Saucerful of Secrets. During the sessions for that third single, he composed 3 additional songs, one of which would be included on the second album, and 2 that were rejected by the other members, though they circulated among fans as clandestine recordings. All of this unfolded in little more than a year. After that, Barrett began staring at people with a vacant gaze, acting with paranoia and sabotaging the band's performances, ceasing to sing, strumming the same chord repeatedly, or simply sitting on stage while the others tried to carry on. The Floyd supplemented Barrett with his old friend David Gilmour, but within a short time, Barrett was no longer invited to live performances, drifted further from the group, and they began speaking of him in the third person, as though he were no longer present. Storm Thorgerson, the graphic artist behind Pink Floyd's album covers and a longtime friend of Barrett, identified a series of catalysts for his total collapse. First, his father, who had encouraged his interest in music and bought him his first guitar, died when Barrett was only 14. Second, Barrett attempted to join an Indian religious sect, but upon meeting the master in London was rejected on the grounds that he was a student who should first concentrate on completing his education. Barrett did not understand this euphemistic refusal and felt compelled to seek his illumination elsewhere, particularly through musical expression and chemical substances. Finally, during the touring period, Barrett was the most handsome and charismatic member of the group. He had no difficulty attracting women and drugs. Thorgerson observed that this combination was far too heavy and did nothing to help his sense of reality. Barrett's volatile and destructive behavior was attributed to a variety of causes: the effects of acid, artistic protest, dementia, manic depression, and schizophrenia. Nicholas Schaffner's historical account in Saucerful of Secrets, The Pink Floyd Odyssey, argues that all these factors, the drugs, the fame, the personal and artistic differences, and certain psychological disturbances that had long lain dormant, interacted to produce increasingly distressing effects. I have always wondered whether Barrett's fall might have been something deeper and darker than a drug-induced psychological deterioration. Given the apparently instantaneous way he created and performed his music with such passion, I wanted to find a more philosophical framework to understand his decline, his apparent need to flee the world of music and never return. He seemed to begin his fall the very minute he began to shine, and the speed of its consummation may have been more than mere coincidence. Philosophy has had its own share of crazy diamonds whose brilliance shook the world. An evident philosophical counterpart to Barrett is Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844 in Prussia. Like Barrett, Nietzsche lost his father young, a Lutheran minister who died when the boy was still a child. Nietzsche spent most of his days using his expertise in linguistics to examine and challenge the way his contemporaries approached philosophy. Due to fragile health, his creative period was brief, extending from his first philosophical publication in 1872 through a temporary withdrawal in 1876 due to illness, to his departure from academia in 1879, and finally, his collapse in January 1889. The breakdown from which he would never recover. In 1900, the year of his death, Nietzsche was only beginning to receive international critical recognition. Today, he is considered one of the most important philosophers of the 19th century and one of the most influential existentialist thinkers. Despite being separated by nearly a century, Nietzsche's creative life presents structural parallels with Barrett's, and his first major book offers an extraordinarily fertile philosophical account for understanding both Barrett's artistic decline and the transformation of Pink Floyd into the creators of the most successful concept albums and shows in the history of rock music. That book is The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music, in which Nietzsche examines Greek tragedy and argues that artistic beauty is born from the fusion of two opposing forces that exist in nature and are imitated in art. These forces are represented by the Greek gods Apollo and Dionysus. The tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles exemplify the equilibrium between them, a simultaneous artistic work of Apollonian dreams and Dionysian intoxication. Neither element exists in complete isolation from the other. Nietzsche does not limit his discussion to art. His theories also apply to human behavior. A well-balanced tension between the two elements in our dispositions can ultimately produce an ordered Apollonian mastery of our dynamic Dionysian passions. Dionysus represents the impulse toward the transgression of limits, the dissolution of boundaries, the destruction of individuality, and excess. The Dionysian element is an ungovernable and limitless dynamism. Apollonian structure provides us with illusions such as language, but Dionysian dominance creates illusions of illusions. The individual who surrenders to the Dionysian realm becomes intoxicated, though not necessarily through drink or drugs. Nietzsche's interest lies in the intoxication that can result from any activity through which a person loses control, even an activity such as dance. This state of inebriation results in a loss of identity and individuality, a dissolution into the undifferentiated ocean of life. If existence is governed by this tension between Apollonian structure and Dionysian frenzy, Pink Floyd's musical career functions as a tug-of-war in which different sides prevail at different moments. With the release of Arnold Layne in February 1967, Barrett intended from the very first to lift the veil of illusion and present reality as it was. The song spoke of a man who stole women's clothing from washing lines at night. When asked to explain his unconventional subject matter, Barrett simply declared that many people dressed in clothes of the opposite sex, and the press should merely accept reality. The early success of the Floyd, resulted from Barrett's wide-ranging musical and literary influences, all of which were filtered into the cauldron of his subconscious to re-emerge as a voice, a sound, and a style that were exclusively his own. But Nietzsche might argue that Barrett surrendered his subjectivity in this Dionysian process. His experience of absolute reality destroyed his individuality, as he was flooded by the excitement of a Dionysian delirium. Thus was born the band's debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Language is an inherited illusion to which we cling so that we may impose order upon the world. Language creates symbols that touch only the surface of the reality words attempt to express. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche wanted to discover whether an individual could meaningfully learn a Dionysian language with which to express Dionysian thought. Barrett's experiments with language are analogous. Matilda Mother speaks of Syd's childhood and the transcendental, innocent effect of having his mother read fairy tales to him. He begs her to continue reading. The lines that are drawn in black, and everything shines. Barrett remembers the experience and sings, "Wondering and dreaming." The words had different meanings. The language of everyday Apollonian illusions transforms into the dreaming illusions of a fairy tale, but Barrett wandered further, seeking to discover what lay beneath those visions. As he approached Dionysian intoxication, the words of the stories acquired new meanings, and his control over experience dissolved. Through his lyrics and through the instrumental improvisations that were even more expressive than words, Barrett may in fact have created a Dionysian language through music. In Astronomy Domine, he sings, "The sounds resound around the icy waters underground." In instrumental works like Interstellar Overdrive and Pow R Talk H, he left the illusions of language entirely behind, surrendering to a sonic flux accountable neither to syntax nor grammar, only to the pure Dionysian impulse. Barrett also opened himself to the spontaneity of mutation through the I Ching, the Taoist book of changes. After casting coins 6 times, a unique pattern can be consulted in the book to obtain a fortune. Barrett wrote Chapter 24 about the result of his consultation, a chapter that speaks of change and return. 2 ideas Nietzsche believed were fundamental to individuals and to society. But one could say he embraced the Dionysian elements of life too fiercely and never found his way back to any acceptable equilibrium. The song Bike offers an early indication of what was happening to him. The track seems to oscillate on the edge of psychosis. Schaffner explains that when the listener enters the room full of musical tunes, all hell breaks loose, the sound effects erupting without any discernible relation to the rest of the song, making it seem all the more diabolical and demented. When Syd and the band recorded Jug Band Blues, the only song he contributed to A Saucerful of Secrets, it was as if the Dionysian whirlwind were threatening his very personality. He questions the illusions surrounding him. "It's awfully considerate of you to think of me here, and I'm most obliged to you for making it clear that I'm not here." He was not present in multiple ways. In terms of Nietzsche's theory, Barrett continued his life of Dionysian art and asked to be called Roger in his later years, abandoning even the name the world knew. Nietzsche explains that the Dionysian spirit yearns for constant inspiration in life, eternally preventing fixation, eternally finding satisfaction in the change of phenomena. Barrett spent his post-music years working on paintings, creating them only to destroy them once finished, to emphasize the transitory nature of his art, the Dionysian refusal to crystallize any form into a definitive state. After Barrett left the band, the former architecture students who had witnessed his surrender to Dionysian intoxication could not replicate the language or the artistic vision of what he had achieved. They opted for a more formal and controlled style that was impossible for a Dionysian artist who had delivered his subconscious to the results of a Taoist oracle and sought inspiration in the wild creatures of fairy tales. As Schaffner observes, it did not take long for the artistic character of Pink Floyd to undergo a 180-degree turn, so that the anarchic spontaneity of the Barrett era gave way to meticulous and well-elaborated constructions in which chance played a very small role. The production of album tracks and the visual elements of concerts became far more tightly structured as the Floyd abandoned the freedom of improvisation that had characterized the Syd era. This was the precise moment when the Apollonian triumphed over the Dionysian, not as a victory, but as a condition of survival. Nietzsche explains that the decline and death of a mythical hero offer spectators an affirmation of life through art. Barrett lifted the veil of Apollonian consciousness to give us a vision of the Dionysian reality behind it. He communicated with us through his music and, for a brief period, reflected for us the tension and unified interaction of the two driving forces of art and human existence. As a tragic artist, however, Barrett, unfortunately, surrendered to the dangers of serving as a medium through which we might learn about reality. On stage and off it, spectators may have felt bewildered before this fantastic excess of life. Yet Nietzsche gives us a reason to understand Barrett's role. Just as with the art of Greek tragedy, Nietzsche could see Barrett as someone who made life possible and worth living. In Chapter 7 of Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows, titled The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, the very title Barrett chose for the Floyd's debut album, the character Mole experiences a spiritual dream, music, and a sensation of forgetfulness that leaves behind a diminished sense of beauty. The call of dawn with its joyful horns. Unlike Mole, however, Barrett would find himself confronting destruction the moment he glimpsed with mortal eyes what should have remained hidden. He could not emerge from the experience of Dionysian intoxication unscathed. For hope, we turn once more to Nietzsche. Here, when the danger to the will is greatest, art approaches as a saving sorceress, expert in healing. She alone knows how to transform those nauseating thoughts about the horror and absurdity of existence into representations with which one can live. Barrett managed to escape the ocean of despair and rediscovered his remarkable individuality through his personal art. With hope, he found a kind of equilibrium upon returning home, to a life that fit his world. Something of this occurred while he dedicated himself to his solo debut, and he learned, as Chapter 24 of the I Ching suggests, that things cannot be definitively destroyed. Nietzsche agreed that the spirit of music cannot be annihilated. That struggle of the spirit in music, he writes, suddenly breaks off, ceases to achieve full development, then vanishes, as it were, from the surface. Was it not to be expected that it would someday be reborn from its mystical depths in the form of art? Barrett vanished from the surface of the world, but the music he left behind, as Nietzsche foresaw, has never ceased to be reborn, generation after generation, from the mystical depths where he deposited it. The crazy diamond still shines, not despite the darkness that swallowed him, but because it was from that darkness that he extracted his purest light. Art does not console, it autopsies. And in the case of Syd Barrett, what the autopsy reveals is not merely a man destroyed, but a creative force that survived the destruction of its creator. A Dionysian language that continues to speak even after the voice that invented it chose to fall silent forever.